What's up, guys? Today, I'm gonna do my best to inform you about a new game I've really been enjoying called Immortals Fenyx Rising. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you might not have, and a lot of you probably vaguely remember hearing the name as if you had conjured it up in a fever dream a few years back. At least, that's exactly how I felt when I noticed this game on the Xbox Game Pass. As if I should know about it, but I actually had no clue as to what it was. After several seconds of thinking about it, I immediately downloaded the game and started playing, because why the hell not? I gotta be honest, right off the bat, I wasn't really feeling it, for reasons I'll get into later. But it didn't take long for it to grow on me, to the point that now I actually believe that this game is superior to its direct competition. My name is Park Attack, let's get going. Alright. So to start things off, let's address the elephant in the room. For those of you familiar with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, it doesn't take very long for you to draw direct comparisons between that game and Immortals Fenyx Rising. The immediate comparisons are so staggering that it might cause you to think right off the bat that this game is just a cheap knockoff. If that is what you're thinking right now, well, you're not alone. It's exactly how I felt when I first started playing as well.
Are you reading my mind right now?
But it didn't take long for me to realize that while there are obviously direct influences from Breath of the Wild, it's very much its own game. One of the things Breath of the Wild did better than any of the other games when it came out was that its questing system was very open. You're thrown into the world, you kind of have 4 objectives to pursue, but you don't have to do it in any order, or you don't even really have to do them at all if you don't want to. After a short tutorial, Immortals Fenyx Rising takes this exact same approach. Teaches you the basics, and then it puts you out into the world, giving you a couple of very vague objectives and lets you take care of the rest. Another thing Breath of the Wild handled really well were puzzles. Of course, we all love combat, but the presence of puzzles throughout the game makes things more interesting. This way you don't get tired of constantly beating up on enemies, and you can slow down and actually use your brain to do something. Among some other smaller things, the third and final major thing that is influenced from Breath of the Wild is navigation and the way that you move throughout the world. Both games have mounts that can be obtained and used to move through the world faster, and when not utilizing mounts, they both utilize stamina as a way to sprint, glide, climb, and swim. Which brings us away from our first comparison to Breath of the Wild and into our next comparison, the other major influence being Assassin's Creed. Whereas in Breath of the Wild, swimming only gets you from point A to point B on top of the water. Just like in Assassin's Creed, you can dive down into the water to swim, opening up a whole new avenue of gameplay. Some of the other things that are more similar to Assassin's Creed than Breath of the Wild are the inventory system and skills. Both Assassin's Creed and Immortals Fenyx Rising contain inventory systems that are complex enough to add variety to the game, but simple enough to understand easily. The same goes for skills. You have a handful of skills at your disposal, some that you can use in combat, some that are useful out of combat, that are all upgraded in pretty simple trees, but add enough to the game to make combat a lot more interesting, as well as implementing the skills in other things such as puzzles or challenges. If you're a fan of either Zelda Breath of the Wild or the newer Assassin's Creed games, I can already recommend Immortals Fenyx Rising. If you're not familiar with either of those games, or you're still unsure, don't worry. I'm going to go into more details about why I like the game, but first we should start with what I don't like about the game. The first thing that I really kind of did not like about the game was the character models. Overall, I am a fan of the art style of the game, but for some reason, the character models just look way too childish to me. I understand that they're trying to target younger children as well as older adults, similar to Breath of the Wild, but in my opinion, Breath of the Wild did a much better job of making the characters more kid-friendly, but also not making them look like dolls. The next thing that kind of made me scratch my head was the writing. Now, once again, overall, throughout the entire game, I think the writing is done pretty well. But there are definitely times when they are trying too hard to come off as being funny or charming, and it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
Yes, that view from Mount Olympus is something else. I haven't seen it in years.
You're not getting that high again, so stop asking.
I don't think it's funny.
Some of you may like it more than me. I do tend to enjoy things like this, but the execution just isn't there sometimes. The next thing that really kind of bugs me is that there are no choices between weapons besides using a sword, a two-handed axe, and a bow. From a combat standpoint, there's no problem with this. You have your light attacks, you have your heavy attacks, and you have your ranged attacks. I think the reason Ubisoft decided to do this is because you can use the axe to chop down trees and bushes, and it just makes more sense than something like a spear, which might be more appropriate for the Greek setting. Although you will be able to loot weapons with different passive effects, you're always tied to the one-handed sword, the two-handed axe, and the bow. The next thing that kind of bums me out is the fact that there's no loot drops from enemies. Yes, you do get adamantine, which is a currency that's used to upgrade your weapons and armor, but in most RPGs, enemies will drop certain items that you can gather or farm and use them in some way through a crafting system to make yourself stronger. This one's not really that big of a deal, as your actual character progression always feels pretty good, but to me, it just feels kind of bad to kill an enemy and then they just poof and disappear into thin air. And finally, not having loot drops directly ties into my last critique of the game, being that there's not really a crafting system in place, and I think there could be. There are several different well-defined currencies that you can go out and farm in order to make yourself stronger in different ways, but just having one set currency for each type of improvement kind of feels maybe just a little too simplistic. I would have really loved to see something like killing a bear drops one fur, and then you use that one fur along with whatever the currency that's already in the game to increase your armor, or something like that. I don't know, this could be me just being too nitpicky, but at the end of the day, when the game does a good job most of the time of keeping things simple, I think this is one case where it's just a little too simple.
Step it up, find something new. You're boring.
Okay, now we got the biggest negatives out of the way. Let me tell you why I actually liked the game. The first thing that really stood out to me was how great the world felt. It's big, it's beautiful, and the art style works really well in making the world feel lush and full and handmade. You don't see a lot or any copy-pasted areas. You don't see any boring, vast, open spaces. The whole world feels really well put together and keeps you interested no matter where you're going or what you're doing. One of the things I think Immortals Fenyx Rising does better than Breath of the Wild when it comes to the world is that it includes a lot more puzzles and challenges readily available throughout the open world. Yes, in this world they do have rifts, which are essentially the same as the shrines in Breath of the Wild. It's basically like a short dungeon that you're just trying to solve puzzles or defeat enemies to get to the end of. And while those are great, they do take you out of the world that you're living in most of the time. But in this game, there's also lots of different challenges and puzzles scattered throughout the world that you can just walk up to and start whenever you want. And that's something that Breath of the Wild really doesn't have. Another thing that I really enjoyed was actually the story. Character arcs develop really well, not only for your main character, but also for the other characters in the game. And although oftentimes the jokes don't land, the seriousness of the story is actually done really well.
A strange coin, bearing Charon's mark.
Typhon stole those too? Charon was saving up for a bridge!
I don't want to get too in-depth on the story because of spoilers, but the bottom line is that the character arcs are done well, the seriousness is done well, the jokes are sometimes good, but sometimes a little cringy. Alright, now let's talk about the big boy, the meat and potatoes of every video game, gameplay. First things first, you can rest assured that combat in this game is fun. The base combat is simple with your light attack, heavy attack, and ranged attacks. There's also parrying and dodging for defensive purposes. But then of course there's a whole bunch of combat skills in the game. Some of them are as simple as combos by hitting the same attack over and over and over again, or by holding down your attack button for a charged up attack. And then there are also separate abilities that just do something differently completely. On top of this, you also have the passives from your gear, which further augment your skills and abilities. And while there is plenty to play around with and to keep you interested for the entire length of the game, it's not overly complicated and it's not something that you really need to spend a lot of time on if you don't want to. Another thing that feels really good is movement. Whether in combat or not, movement feels really crisp and really responsive. Another aspect of the game that I really like is the gear. First off, I just think the gear looks really good. Both the weapons and the armor on both the male and female models look really great. There are lots of different armor sets in the game, and pretty much all of them look cool, or at the very least, look like something that the art team didn't half-ass. Now, if you like the effects on a certain piece of gear, but you don't like how it looks, you can change the appearance with the transmog system. There's no resources or currency required for this. As long as you have unlocked a certain model of a weapon or armor, you can use that model on any piece of gear you have. Other things to improve your character's overall strength, such as increasing health, increasing stamina, or increasing the level of your weapons and armor, require simple currencies, which are pretty easy and straightforward to farm. The same sort of mantra is used for potions. It's a simple system, very straightforward, and even color-coded, that's easy to understand, it works well, and improves the game. The final thing I think the game does really well are puzzles. Whether it's going into an actual rift and completing it, or just doing one of the challenges in the open world, puzzles are abundant, there's a good variety, and for the most part, they're interesting and fun. So all in all, Immortals Fenyx Rising is not a perfect game, but what game really is? If you want to make the argument that Zelda Breath of the Wild is the perfect game, I think weapon durability would like to have a word. As far as this game goes, yes, sometimes it can come off as childish, with some corny jokes and some questionable character models that kind of make the game feel like it was over-targeted younger children. Being locked into a one-handed sword, a two-handed axe, and a bow might not be that big of a deal to you, but it kind of feels like a missed opportunity for me. We also have the fact that there's no loot that's actually dropped from enemies besides currency. This is also tied into the fact that there's no real crafting system aside from gathering herbs to make potions. But what this game does have is a big, beautiful world that always feels full, always feels alive and active, even though you are essentially the only human existing in this world. The story's done very well overall, only leaving you rolling your eyes at some jokes. The core gameplay is fun, it's non-repetitive, character progression is there, and overall it's complex enough to keep you interested, but simple enough to not feel like it's wasting your time or making you do anything unnecessary. I do highly recommend you check out this game, as it's available on almost every platform, and especially if you already have Xbox Game Pass, where it can be downloaded and played immediately. And if you do decide to do so, stay tuned, as I'm going to be coming out with more videos on Immortals Fenyx Rising. Alright then guys, that's going to do it for this video. Let me know what you think down in the comments, like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for more Immortals Fenyx Rising content. My name is Parkatech. Peace.